All right, hi everyone, I'm Ryan, and today I'm going to be talking about anti-Black racism on Long Island. So over the past week, I've thought about this is actually not the first major project I've done on anti-Black racism. Actually, in high school, my major projects were on the apartheid in South Africa, was on Jackie Robinson. But I remember thinking back to doing those projects, and I felt sort of distanced from them, both geographically and time-wise. But little did I know, and now I do, I was living in a very segregated place. And I've come to learn recently, a very racist place. And Long Island is racist for reasons that are just embedded in its foundation. And that's what I'm going to talk more about. I'm going to focus on anti-Black racism, and I'm going to talk about structural racism, racist policies as opposed to racist ideas. So for those who don't know, Long Island is the eastern suburb of New York City. It's made up of Nassau County and Suffolk County. What I'm about to say is going to be the least important thing you're going to learn today, but I think it's important to understand the vernacular. I live in New York. I live on Long Island. So it's on Long Island. Just want to get that down. And I believe that Long Island is a good example of suburban racial inequalities, which are not talked about necessarily as much. So that's why I'm focusing on this geographically. I think it can be applied to all suburbs. So I'm going to talk about the historical policies that led to segregation and various disparities, and then why it's not getting better. So I'm going to talk about the historical policies. First of all, there was a suburban boom post-World War II, and you can see that's when the population exploded on Long Island as people were moving away from the city into the suburbs. Why was this? Partly because of federal policies, such as the GI Bill, which is focused on World War II veterans, Federal Housing Administration loans, which came before that period, where it was disproportionately white people who were getting these loans to buy houses in the suburbs. But it made it affordable, and that's why we saw growth. And then you look at Long Island, come 1970, it was less than 5% Black. There was no redlining per se on Long Island because there weren't a lot of Black people there. That was mainly in the city, in New York City. But you had Black people confined to areas such as Harlem. The conditions were getting worse at the time, so they would have loved to come to the suburbs. But you had developments such as Levittown, the most famous example on Long Island, which was kind of the prototype for post-World War II suburban communities across the country. They were only allowing white homebuyers, and the FHA authorized this. And so by 1960, Levittown had 82,000 residents. None of them were Black. And you just had a few smaller Black communities spread throughout Long Island. You also can look at their architecture. Robert Moses was the leader of that. He made it very car-centric. It was built on its highways. And he also kind of built some bridges that made it difficult for buses to move across Long Island. So all of this led to the segregation that you see here from this time lapse. What it was in 1960, 60 years later, the segregation remains very, very similar if you look at it by census tract, which is essentially a little bit narrower than looking at it by community. Not a lot has changed. And this, I think, is the clearest example of the segregation on Long Island. 10 of 179 zip codes contain more than half of Long Island's Black population, which is pretty astounding. You can take it even further. 11 out of 291 communities contain more than half of Long Island's Black population. And then you can look at some of these segregation lines are actually drawn out by the roads that were so centric to Long Island. The Northern State Parkway and LIE, you look at south and north, mostly Black, mostly not Black. The starkest example, the Meadowbrook State Parkway, a major north to south artery. West of it, you have the town of Freeport, 31% Black. East of it, you have the town of Merrick, 2% Black, almost entirely white. So you have all this segregation, you have the policies, and I think the most significant thing it leads to is the economic disparities. So you had the white people were able to buy homes out of Long Island first, so naturally their wealth is going to increase faster. This is for Long Island that the property values have grown, but this would be the case anywhere in the country. So you can look at this dashboard that is linked to on my blog post. These are the census tracts. It shows median property value. If you were to filter this to make it 10% or more Black, you see that the property values are much lower on average. And so this lack of wealth, along with other factors, what it has led to is the more Black tracts have a lower household median income, and that's pretty clear. What I think is more astounding, if you look at the wealthiest Black households, those making $100,000 or more, and you look at those census tracts that have the most of these families, those tracts still have a lower median income than the average Long Island median income. which that means the wealthy black families are not living with other wealthy families, other wealthy white families on Long Island. So the segregation is more by race than it is by income. And then you can also look at, as you get into tracts with more of a black population, there's also fewer cars owned per household, which is not good on Long Island. As I mentioned, it's central to living there. So you take all of these and then you get to something that's really important on Long Island. That is the educational disparities, because people move to and around Long Island based on school districts, really. And you see that the black students are concentrated in really just a handful of its school districts. You have a lot of mostly white school districts. And in fact, if you take the really small sample of MQM class of 2021 students who grew up on Long Island, you have that school district, you have that school district. 1% black, 1% black, 3% black. So you can see how this starts to eventually lead to outcomes. And then you can look at it in terms of free lunches. It's really a proxy for your family being close to poverty. New York will give you free lunches. So again, this is a dashboard that you can filter the white and black student percentage. If you look at the school districts that are majority white, the dark areas went away and there are not as many free lunches given out, which means that the black school districts are in areas that face more poverty. And it's shown by this. If you look at how New York defines need-based school districts, in the higher need school districts, it's much more black than in the lower need districts. So that's where the majority of the black students are. And then, unfortunately, if you look at the average expenditures per student, it's higher in the low need districts. Why is this? It's mostly due to property taxes. Your lower need districts are in the much more wealthy areas. And despite the best efforts of federal and state funds to try to fund these lower need districts, these higher need districts, still more is spent in the lower need districts. And this puts black students at a disadvantage. You can say a less quality education. And then here, which is also pretty staggering, if you look at just a ranking by the US News and World Report of the top 10 high schools on Long Island, about 1% white, a huge contrast between the rest of the high schools on Long Island. So a lot of people, moving around Long Island will look for better quality school districts. Really, that's just code for whiter neighborhoods. And you see for black students, it's generally just a tougher path to get to college, especially elite schools. So those are the educational disparities. And then all of this can be, or many of these, I think all of them really can be tied to health disparities. Here's a map of the hospitals in Nassau County. They're generally not in black areas. So, if you don't have a car, it's even more difficult. And it contributes, along with all these other factors, to the health complications that black people face more of on average than white people. Premature deaths, asthma, diabetes, you see some of the starkest differences. And this is true, around the country, not just on Long Island. And the same can be said of the criminal justice disparities, which has come to the limelight in recent years. Same on Long Island. And as the punishment gets more severe, there's it's more disparate in how it impacts the black population. So all that being said, it's 2021. I'm telling you, it's not getting better. Even though the black population percentage on Long Island is increasing over time, it's becoming more segregated. One way to look at this is Brown University. They made this white-black dissimilarity index values. So basically, it tracks black and white residential patterns. As you get a higher value, it's more segregated. This was 1980, and Long Island, of the metropolitan divisions, mostly suburban areas, was somewhere in the middle. 3 decades later, towards the top. So it shows segregation getting worse. And this is another big reason for segregation increasing. Newsday, which is Long Island's local newspaper, did an undercover investigation in the last few years. They had black and white testers. They each requested identical terms for housing in the same areas. But real estate agents presented them with different listings. They steered the white testers towards more white neighborhoods, the black testers towards more black neighborhoods. And that's what this is showing here, the big gaps between them. And black testers were treated unequally in 49% of cases, nearly half the time. So this contributes to the segregation. And then you can look at the wealth gap as well. It's only growing. I talked about how white homeowners came to Long Island first, so they got a head start. But their homes are also in more wealthy communities, and so their values appreciate faster, and that only grows the wealth gap more. So what can be done? I think the best thing, significant government intervention, get funding. This is the way to make change. This is why voting matters. You look at New York actually reacting to the Newsday study, they're going to have undercover testers try to combat this housing discrimination. Restructure public school districts, fix mortgage discrimination. These are ways to attack segregation. But I mean, these policies are also 100 years old, and individually it's tough to necessarily affect change. So what we can all do is, don't tolerate racist ideas, be anti-racist. And then as Jeremy was talking about before we started, spread awareness. That's a really big deal. That's why Black Lives Matter is so effective. You might not have been aware that segregation, it's a problem in New York. It's a problem in the suburbs. So it's really everywhere in the country. It's something I wasn't as aware of. And now, doing this, I'm more aware of my white privilege, and it makes me more motivated to try to affect change. And I think that's one of the big takeaways of this. Thank you.